Tanashri might have informed many of you, most of you maybe, that today I will give the lecture in the morning session itself, the whole lecture. Earlier I divided the lecture into two parts because I was thinking that since many of you don't have the background, giving the whole lecture may be taxing or it will be a heavy dose. But now I think that you are sufficiently used to my lectures, and so it won't be a very big problem. Of course, I will take a short break in between, and so that some points of if there are some points of clarification that we can have, and then I will proceed. In the last lecture, we have discussed two epistemological positions of the two sub-schools of Charvakas, cognitive skepticism and extreme empiricism. According to the extreme empiricist position, Charvakas accepted only perception as the authentic means to knowledge and rejected this status to inference. This is the popular view about Charvaka Darshana. But this view is not accepted in by some modern scholars such as Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay and Ramakrishna Bhattacharya. These scholars reject the popular view and maintain that Charvakas did not question the authenticity of all inferences, that they accepted inferences of empirically verifiable type and rejected those of other type. Against this, I have held that Lokayata Charvaka need not be regarded as a unitary school of philosophy. It should be better understood as a family of schools which had rejection of otherworldly metaphysics as their common minimum program. Hence, skeptical position of Jayarashi as well as extreme empiricist view, which is popularly attributed to Charvakas, can be regarded as genuine Charvaka positions. At the same time, what the modern scholars such as Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay and Ramakrishna Bhattacharya regard as the genuine position of Charvakas can be acknowledged as one of the positions, even as sophisticated position of some Charvakas, though not as the only genuine Charvaka position. This sophisticated position can be called mitigated empiricism, according to which perception as well as a certain kind of inference are accepted as pramana. Continuity between extreme and mitigated empiricism. Of course, it is not necessary to assume that the two views, extreme empiricist view that only perception is pramana, and the mitigated empiricist view that a kind of inference is also pramana, are absolutely inconsistent with each other. The apparent inconsistency between the two can be resolved on the following lines. 1. Mitigated empiricist Charvakas are still empiricists in the sense that though they accept inference along with perception, inference that they regard as acceptable is supposed to be verifiable through perception or necessary for the explanation what one knows by perception. So ultimately, perception is supposed to be the major pramana which governs the acceptability of inference. 2. Though mitigated empiricist Charvakas accept a kind of inference as pramana, this does not mean that they are denying the weaknesses of inference as pramana. They are not withdrawing the criticism of inference, particularly that which questions the possibility of knowing universal concomitants with certainty. At the same time, they are accepting inference as a useful means to knowledge. We have already distinguished in the last lecture between strong and weak sense of the word pramana. Just to repeat, according to the strong sense of the word pramana, According to the strong sense of the word, pramana means an authoritative means to knowledge or an authority. According to weak sense, pramana means a useful means to knowledge, but not necessarily an authoritative means to knowledge. Hence, we can say that when Charvakas claim that Anumana is not pramana, they are using the word pramana in its strong sense, whereas when the mitigated empiricist Charvakas accept a kind of inference as pramana, they use the word in the weak sense, not in the strong sense. This should not be taken to mean that the difference between the extreme empiricist Charvakas and mitigated empiricist Charvakas is only verbal or terminological, that is, that the extreme empiricists use the word pramana in strong sense, whereas mitigated empiricists use it in weak sense. The difference between them is subtler than that. The extreme empiricist Charvakas are not interested in distinguishing between types of inferences as acceptable inferences and non-acceptable inferences. Their criticism of inference is pervasive and non-discriminative. On the other hand, when mitigated empiricist Charvakas would grant inferences as pramana in weak sense, they do not grant all inferences in that sense. They would make a distinction between acceptable inferences and non-acceptable inferences, even in the weak sense. Hence, whereas extreme empiricist Charvakas make two-tier division of means to knowledge, authentic and inauthentic, the mitigated empiricist Charvakas would make a three-tier division as follows. 1. They accept certain cognitions or the means thereof as pramana in the strong sense of the term. For example, they accept perception in that way. 2. They accept cognitions of a certain type as pramana in the weak sense, as probably true cognitions or useful means to knowledge, though not as authority. For example, they accept certain types of inference in that way. And 3. They do not accept certain types of cognition as pramana even in the weak sense. For example, they do not accept inference for the existence of God as pramana even in weak sense. So, the classification of inferences which these Charvakas are making is the one between those which are acceptable as pramana in some sense and inferences which are not acceptable as pramana at all. Now, the next question is, how exactly do the mitigated empiricist Charvakas discriminate between the two kinds of inference, acceptable ones and non-acceptable ones? Broadly speaking, here the mitigated empiricist Charvakas have in mind the distinction between scientific inferences and metaphysical inferences or speculative inferences. We find that in the Indian polemical literature, two proposals have been made from the side of Charvakas. So, we have actually mentioned that earlier. Jayanta in his Nyayamanjari refers to the view that inference is of two kinds, Utpanna Pratiti and Utpadya Pratiti, which I have translated as empirical and non-empirical, a rather simplistic translation. The inference of fire from smoke belongs to the former kind, that is Utpanna Pratiti Anumana. The inference of transcendent entities like God belongs to the latter, that is Utpadya Pratiti Anumana. Hence, the former kind of inference is acceptable as pramana, but the latter is not. Jayanta attributes this view to whom he calls more learned Sushikshitatara Charvakas. Then, second proposal is Kamalashila in his commentarial work Tattva Sangraha Panjika quotes Purandara's statement, Charvakas do admit commonsensical inferences, that is Loka Prasiddha Anuman, but inference which is made by transcending the worldly way, Laukika Marga, transcending Laukika Marga, is denied by them. The first proposal gives us a positivist approach to acceptability of inference, and the second proposal gives us a common sense oriented approach to acceptability of inference. Let us consider the two proposals in some detail. First proposal, positivist approach to acceptability of inference. As I have said, the more learned Charvakas, as referred to by Jayanta, accept empirical inferences but deny non-empirical ones. Empirical inference and non-empirical inference are rather simplified translations of the complex terms used by Jayanta, namely Utpanna Pratiti Anuman and Utpadya Pratiti Anuman. Literally, Utpanna Pratiti means that which is experienced in the past, and Utpadya Pratiti means that which is yet to be experienced. Apparently, the two terms are used as the adjectives of inference, Anuman, but they should not be taken in their literal sense. That is because an inference itself cannot be characterized either as experienced in past or yet to be experienced. So, what is the word Utpanna Pratiti, Utpadya Pratiti adjective of? It is not the adjective of inference but of the object of inference. Charvakas are here referring to two situations, one in which the object of inference is already known through experience, and the other where the object of inference is yet to be experienced. Hence, the terms Utpanna Pratiti and Utpadya Pratiti should be taken to characterize the object of an inference, that is, the target property of the inference and not inference itself. For the sake of simplicity and brevity, I am translating Utpanna Pratiti Anumana as empirical inference and Utpadya Pratiti Anumana as non-empirical inference. Of course, when we say that the object of inference, that is target property, in the case of empirical inference is already experienced, in the case of non-empirical inference it is not already experienced, we are not saying, to use type token distinction, that exactly the same object in token sense is experienced in one case and not experienced in another. That is, we are not saying that in the case of Utpanna Pratiti Anumana, the same say fire item is known which we have seen before, but we have seen fire, that much is sufficient. That is, some item which has of the same type. Of the same type means fire type. Even in the example of inference of fire from smoke, which is a kind of empirical inference, we have not already experienced the specific fire item that we are inferring, but we have experienced some fire item, for example, the fire in the kitchen. In a non-empirical inference, on the other hand, the object of inference is not experienced before, even in type sense. For example, in the inference of the existence of God, we have neither experienced before the God that we are inferring, nor have we have experienced some other God or God in general. Hence, when the object of inference, that is an object of that kind, is already the object of one's experience, the inference is called empirical, and when the object of inference, that is an object of that kind, is not the object of one's experience at all, the inference is called non-empirical inference. In other words, when we can say we can say that the first type of inference can be called empirical inference because its object is experienced type, that is an empirical object. As against this, the second type of inference can be called non-empirical because its object is not experienced type, that is and hence is a non-empirical object. The distinction will be roughly between the inference the conclusion of which is verifiable and that the conclusion of which is not verifiable. The term Utpadya Pratiti literally means that the experience of which is to be generated. Utpadya means to be generated. So, that the literal meaning will be that the experience of which is to be generated. Hence, Utpadya as the adjective of Pratiti can simply mean that it is to be generated through the inferential cognition itself or through some other alleged means of cognition such as the verbal testimony. But it does not mean that we will know it through senses. That is, Utpadya Pratiti does not have the meaning that we have not experienced the object so far, but we will experience in future. But it is something which will be experienced through the inference itself or through some other means such as Shabda Pramana, that is verbal testimony. In the argument for the existence of God, for instance, God, which is the object of inference, is not something which we have already experienced or what we are likely to experience, but the inference of God itself generates the experience of God. This can be taken to mean that the speculative inference of God generates an imaginary or conceptual cognition of God. Or the inference of God may strengthen one's faith in scriptures, which may lead to the alleged experience of God. But when these Charvakas call theistic inference as Utpadya Pratiti, they do not mean that the inference will lead to the perceptual experience of God. Here I want to point out that the Charvaka classification of inference just discussed need not be taken in isolation as the classification peculiar to Charvakas. I mean, this terminology is attributed to Charvakas by Jayanta Bhatta, that Charvakas distinguish between Utpanna Pratiti and Utpadya Pratiti Anumana. And others do not use this terminology, but I am suggesting that others have made same type of classification in by using different terminology. For example, in fact, the classification was explicitly or implicitly made by other systems, many other systems. For example, it is parallel to Vaisheshika classification of inference into seen and seen in general. In Vaisheshika Sutra, we find this classification of Anumana into Drushta and Samanyato Drushta. Similarly, the threefold classification of inference presented by Nayayikas and Sankhyas as Purvavat, Sheshavat and Samanyato Drushta. That is, the literal meaning of Purvavat is like the previous, Sheshavat like the residual, and Samanyato Drushta seen in general. This can be interpreted as an expansion of the twofold Vaisheshika classification and hence can be compared with Charvaka classification. That is, Purvavat and Sheshavat, these particular terms are interpreted in various ways, and there is no uniform interpretation of these two terms. But roughly we can say that Purvavat, I mean, sometimes, for example, they are interpreted as Purvavat means inference of cause from effect, and Sheshavat means inference of effect from cause. So both will fall in the category of verifiable inferences. That is, therefore we can say that Purvavat and Sheshavat can be subsumed under what Vaisheshikas call seen, that is Drushta inferences. Means which is the inference which is based on say observation and non-observation of particular cases, whereas Samanyato Drushta means which is not based on observation and non-observation of the particular objects that we are going to infer, and that on the basis of which we are going to infer it, that is sign and signified. They are not observed in their particularity, but they are seen in a very, very general form. That is the idea in Samanyato Drushta inference. For example, inference for the existence of God is regarded as a kind of Samanyato Drushta inference. Even Nayayikas would call it a Samanyato Drushta type of Anumana, who accept the existence of God, but they would say that this inference is not Drushta type of inference, but Samanyato Drushta type of inference. Why? Because how they argue for the existence of God in the world, or the things such as trees, mountain, etc., they must have a maker, like say a pot which has potter as its maker. And then the universally general statement will be whatever is a product has a maker. Now, while explaining this universal statement, what kind of examples are available? The examples will be that of say pot, cloth, buildings, temples and all that, which are made by some living sentient beings, conscious beings. On the basis of such examples, Nayayikas argue that this whole world, which is made of natural objects such as trees, mountains, etc., that also must have a maker. Now here what happens is the universally general in the universally general statement we never have the term God. We can have a more general term, namely maker. So and we are not again talking about the whole world as a product in the universally general statement, but any product. So the universally general statement, that is the statement of pervasion or vyapti, is about general terms such as product, maker. We can never have God in the evidence part. And on the basis of that, what we prove is that the whole world must have a maker. And then after that, what Nayayikas do is that then they try to say that since God is the maker of the whole world, so he must be omniscient. So the characteristics of God are later on derived after proving that there is a maker. But in the basic inference, we don't have God along with its properties in the universally general statement or in the part of evidence. So this becomes a kind of samanyato drushta anumana, that is where the evidence is seen at a very general level, not at a specific level. So on the basis of evidence of a very general kind, we try to prove something which is specific in nature. That is the kind of inference, namely samanyato drushta anumana, and we will see that in this kind of inference there is always a kind of leap from something which is seen to something which cannot be seen, something which is ordinary to something which is extraordinary. So and this kind of leap is not acceptable to Charvakas. That is, you are jumping from what is observed to something which cannot be observed. So I am just trying to explain this distinction between drushta and samanyato drushta anumana, which is, this distinction is accepted by many systems, either in the form of threefold classification, that is purvavat, sheshavat, samanyato drushta, or in the form of twofold classification, drushta and samanyato drushta. But this category of samanyato drushta as a different kind of inference has been accepted by many of these systems. Now this shows that the distinction between the two kinds of inferences was so fundamental that many systems were aware of it and acknowledged it in one way or the other. In a way, this was the distinction, to put it simplistically, between scientific inference, where we go from one empirical evidence to another empirical say conclusion, and metaphysical inference, where we go from empirical evidence to something which is non-empirical. The results of scientific inferences were verifiable, the results of metaphysical inference were not verifiable. Though different schools were aware of this distinction, the attitude of Charvaka school and non-Charvaka schools towards this distinction was different. For the non-Charvaka schools of philosophy, both the types of inferences were acceptable. In fact, the non-empirical inferences were more important for some of them, because non-empirical inferences were the tools of establishing their transcendental metaphysical doctrines. Charvakas differed from the other schools exactly on this point. Charvakas held that since empirical inferences are verifiable through perception, they have greater justifiability. Non-empirical inferences, on the other hand, are not verifiable, and hence they are weaker in terms of justifiability. Hence, the classifications of inferences that Vaisheshikas, Nayayikas and Sankhyas were presenting were classifications of acceptable inferences according to them, But the classification that Charvakas were presenting, though formally similar to these classifications, was meant to be the one between acceptable and non-acceptable inferences. Some examples of non-empirical inferences which were not acceptable to Charvakas. Here it may be interesting to consider some of the non-empirical inferences which were actually presented by the other schools of philosophy. Argument for the existence of God, which I have already talked about. Nayayikas presented a non-empirical inference for establishing the existence of God. The argument runs trees, mountains, etc. Must be having a creator because they are products like a pot. The argument says that just as pot has a creator, namely a potter, similarly the world consisting of trees and mountains also must have a creator. This is an analogical inference which takes the leap from an empirically verifiable creator, a potter, to an empirically non-verifiable, alleged creator, God. Non-empirical inferences often take such a leap from empirical to non-empirical, which is not permissible according to the positivist empiricist Charvakas. Now, another example is argument for the existence of soul, that is Purusha, according to Sankhya system. The Sankhya argument for the existence of soul involves a similar leap. Now, some background of Sankhya for those who are not acquainted with, say, Sankhya metaphysics. Sankhya school accepts matter, Prakriti, and souls as the two basic components, that is Purushas, as the two basic components of the universe. Whatever we see in this universe is a manifestation of that matter. Souls are inactive spectators of the activities of the matter. The existence of souls becomes important for Sankhya because according to them, whatever the matter does, it does not do it for the sake of itself, but for the sake of soul. So, soul does not do anything according to Sankhya, it is only a witness consciousness. Whatever is done by matter, but matter does not do it for the sake of itself, but it does it for the sake of Purusha, for the sake of the souls. Now, Sankhya schools gives this itself as the ground of the existence of soul. So, on what basis can you say that there must be soul? There must be souls. I mean, according to them, there are many souls. The argument runs the things such as the universe, such as the visual sense organ, are meant for something other than them because they are composite in nature, sanghata. All composite things are meant for something other than themselves. For example, the things like bed are not meant for themselves but for persons who use them. So, everything which is composite is meant for something else. For example, the things like bed, chair, etc., they are not meant for themselves but they are meant for human beings who use them. Similarly, the sense organs, the body, I mean, whatever we possess, all the organic say parts of our body, they are not they are functional, but they are not functional for themselves, but they are functional for something else or someone else, and that someone else is Purusha or soul. The Buddhists such as Dingnag and Dharmakirti found fault with this argument. They brought out the gap between evidence and the intended conclusion. What Sankhya thinkers intend to prove is the existence of the soul, that is Purusha, which is non-composite, whereas the persons for whom the things such as what Sankhya thinkers intend to prove is the existence of the soul, which is non-composite, whereas the persons for whom the things such as beds and chairs are meant are essentially composite. So, I mean, what Buddhists are arguing is that beds, chairs, etc., they are composite and they are also meant for persons who are composite. And therefore, on the basis of this evidence, we can say that the composite things, which whatever is composite, is meant for something composite, some other thing which is composite. But what you means what Sankhyas are trying to argue is that ultimately this body, sense organs, etc. is meant for something which is non-composite, because Purusha or soul is something which is not composite according to them. So this they want to prove something non-composite on the basis of what is composite. That is the persons for whom bed, chair, etc. are meant are composite. So on the basis of that, they should have said that souls also are composite. But I mean, this is the fallacy called Ishta Vighata Krut. That is, what they desire to prove, they are not able to prove. Although they, in the argument itself, they are not saying that that whatever is composite is meant for composite. They are or non-composite, namely Purusha. They are not saying this, but they intend to prove this, and that is not. They are not able to prove this because of this leap, because of this gap. From Charvaka point of view, the same gap between the evidence and the intended conclusion can be explained in terms of empirical and non-empirical. The persons for whom beds and chairs are meant are empirical, whereas the so-called souls for whom sense organs are supposed to be meant are non-empirical. Hence, the inference being non-verifiable is not acceptable according to Charvakas. The purely negative inference, that is Kevala Vyatireki Anumana of the existence of soul. This is third example. In the first talk, I referred to the Nyaya classification of inference into three kinds as purely positive, purely negative, and positive negative. That is, that in which only positive concomitance is available and negative concomitance is not available at all. That inference is called purely positive inference, Kevalanvayi Anumana. The inference in which only negative concomitance is available, positive concomitance is not available at all, that will be called Kevala Vyatireki, purely negative inference. And the inference in which both the types of concomitants are available, that is called Anvaya Vyatireki inference. For example, inference of fire from smoke is Anvaya Vyatireki, that is both positive and negative concomitances are available there. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire, that will be positive concomitance. Wherever there is absence of fire, there is absence of smoke, that will be negative concomitance. But there are some inferences in which both the concomitances are not available, only one concomitance is available. So Nayayikas talked about such three kinds of inferences, and when they talked about Kevala Vyatireki, that is purely negative inference, the example of purely negative inference which they gave, particularly one Nayayika, namely Keshava Mishra, in his work Tarka Bhasha, he gave this example of purely negative inference, namely the existence of inference of the existence of soul. Keshava Mishra, a Nayayika, cited the following purely negative inference for establishing the existence of soul. The living bodies of beings must be possessing soul because they possess the act of breathing, etc. I mean, that is the inference. All the living bodies must be possessing souls because they possess life, so to say. The symptoms of life are seen, and this, according to them, the breathing and maybe the behavior, lively behavior, all this cannot be explained unless we also accept that the body possesses soul. That is what they thought, and therefore, now in this particular inference, all the living bodies is the provable property bearer. Again, I mean, these technicalities you have to take into account. So, instances or similar cases, dissimilar cases, all should be available outside the provable property bearer. This is the rule of inference. Now, since all living bodies, the set of all living bodies is the provable property bearer, outside that we don't have any living things. We have only non-living things. So, in this particular inference, what will be the positive concomitance? Positive concomitance is wherever there is sign there is signified. For example, wherever there is activity of breathing, for example, there will be soul. There is soul. Wherever there is breathing, there is soul. But for this, we don't have any example, because all the living bodies is the provable property bearer. So outside this provable property bearer, that is Paksha, there are no breathing things, and there is no question of their being soul. So we cannot have positive concomitance in this inference. And what will be the negative concomitance? Whatever lacks soul lacks breathing. So we have many examples of that kind, that is tables, chairs, everything which is insentient, we can say that it does not breathe and it does not have soul. So in this inference we have only negative concomitance and no positive concomitance. So such inferences also, we do not have positive concomitance of the type whatever breathes possesses soul, because although we have seen many breathing things before, we have not experienced soul. From Charvaka point of view, after all, you are trying to prove something which is not empirical, which is you are trying to prove the existence of soul, which you have never experienced so far, and which you will never experience. So for that reason, Charvakas would say that this inference is not acceptable. So mitigated empiricist Charvakas would criticize this inference for the same reason. Now I come to a different point, that is, I am suggesting that this positivist approach to inference was not only a matter of say theoretical discussion for Charvakas, but it was also something which they tried to experiment with. So the classification of inference into empirical and non-empirical and rejection of non-empirical inferences proved to be useful to Charvakas in examination of the traditional beliefs in soul and life after death. We come across an interesting story in Buddhist canons of a chieftain Payasi, who was a non-believer and had confirmed his this worldly and materialist view through experiments. Payasi had a debate with the Buddhist monk Kumara Kassapa. According to the story, Payasi argued for his materialist views and Kumara Kassapa countered his arguments through analogical and speculative arguments. A similar story is found in Jaina canonical literature with some variations. So there the name is Payasi, because it is in Prakrit and this is in Pali. So maybe the Sanskrit word for them may be common, say Pradeshi or something, from which we have Payasi in Prakrit and Payasi in Sanskrit, Payasi in Pali. Now in Buddhist canons, the Payasi has a debate with a Buddhist monk. In Jaina canons, this Payasi, the king Payasi, has a debate with a Jaina monk, and both the Jaina monk in that Jaina story, he is a believer in the sense that he believes in life after death. Of course, in Jaina story, that Jaina monk not only believes in life after death, other worlds and so on, but also in soul, Jiva. Whereas in this Buddhist story, the Buddhist monk does not believe in soul, because Buddhists don't believe in soul, but he believes in life after death, other worlds, etc. And the Payasi or Payasi which has debate with them, the arguments are more or less the same. So it is possible that originally there is one story which is say transformed in these two literatures, that is Jaina and Buddhist literatures, in different forms. And according to my view, Jaina story must have been original, and then it must have been adopted in Buddhist literature. The materialist arguments made by Payasi in the respective dialogues largely follow the positivist approach. Payasi, according to the story, did not make speculations regarding existence or non-existence of soul, but conducted experiments to find out whether there must be the soul substance which leaves the body at the time of death. Payasi, being a chieftain, had freedom to execute death sentence to the criminals who had committed a serious crime. He used this freedom by killing the criminals experimentally and observing what exactly happens. Once, while executing the death sentence, he managed to throw the criminal alive into a jar, to close the mouth of it and cover it tightly. The criminal was killed by putting the jar onto a furnace and kindling the fire. When the man was dead, the mouth of the jar was unbound and opened, and Payasi quickly observed with the idea, perhaps I may see the soul of him coming out. Payasi did not see the soul substance leaving the body, although all other conditions were kept under control. He inferred that there is no life after death, there is no soul, no life after death, and so on and so forth. And there are many other experiments also. For example, he weighed the body of a living person, and after killing him he weighed it again, and he thought that if earlier soul was there, then the weight must be more, and when soul goes out the weight should be reduced, but there was no difference in the living body and the weight of the living body and weight of the dead body, and so on and so forth. Now, this shows that there must have been some Charvaka thinkers who applied positivist epistemology not only at theoretical level, but applied it in practical situations. In the book Charvaka Lokayata, Devi Prasad Chattopadhyaya has included the Buddhist passage, Payasi Sutta, it is called Payasi Sutta, from Digha Nikaya. In the above mentioned debate, which Payasi had with the Buddhist monk, or a similar dialogue in Jaina canons, the opponent, who believed in karma, rebirth, and other worlds, did not provide any verifiable counter evidence, but made speculative and analogical arguments and appealed to the divine eye developed through spiritual practice. That is, although we cannot observe other worlds and soul and whatever, but sages which develop divine eye, they are able to see that. I mean, such arguments the Buddhist monk and the Jaina monk advance. Now, I think I can stop here and we can have, I mean, if there are some points of clarification, we can have them for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I will proceed to the next part of the paper. Because this is all about what I have called positivist say school of within mitigated empiricist Charvakas. We have two positions. One position I have called positivist position, that is according to which inference is acceptable, the conclusion of which is verifiable, and the other I have called common sense oriented approach, but that we will see little later. Is there any doubt or we can proceed? We can proceed, no problem. Okay. So, difficulties in the positivist form of mitigated empiricism. In general, we can say that the positivist form of mitigated empiricism must have helped Charvakas in rejecting the speculative arguments for the entities like God and soul advanced by their believer opponents. However, positivism has its own limitations. In order to lead a happy life in this world without believing in the other worlds and such other things, and in order to explain the possibility of this worldly life, we need to believe in certain things which are not verifiable. Take for example the existence of sense organs. Though perception becomes possible because of sense organs, and hence we have to accept their existence, sense organs themselves are not perceptible. Similarly, Charvaka accepts the existence of other persons, but recognizing another person as person, that is, as a sentient being, is not possible without inference of other minds. And since other minds are beyond the scope of perceptual knowledge, they cannot be established by empirical inference. Similarly, though we can perceive the spatio-temporal objects in the world, space and time as general concepts are not empirical. They need to be postulated for explaining the nature of things in this world. Moreover, Charvakas not only deny the existence of soul or consciousness outside the body, they also try to give a materialist explanation of consciousness. They argue that consciousness arises from the four gross elements, namely earth, water, fire and air, like the intoxicating power which arises from molasses, or like the red color which is originally not there, arises in the mixture of betel nuts, betel leaf and spices by chewing it. That is, the word for that is pan, which in Banaras, this city is famous for pan. And you can experiment this by chewing pan, whether red color arises in it or not. The inference for materialism that Charvakas are giving here is non-verifiable type of inference. So, this particular inference that a consciousness arises from four material elements is non-verifiable inference. The materialist thesis of the Charvakas that consciousness arises from matter cannot be verified either in one's own case or in the case of others. And the instance of intoxicating power and molasses is just a metaphor and not an instance proper, because the power of intoxication is not the same as consciousness. Hence, the positivist Charvakas, who accept only perception and empirical inference as pramana, cannot explain the phenomena such as sense organs, space, time, other minds, and the materialist explanation of consciousness, which are necessary constituents of Charvaka's this worldly approach to life. This might have led some mitigated empiricist Charvakas to classify inference in a way more open to commonsensical and materialist reasoning. This brings us to the second classification of inference, namely commonsensical and transcommonsensical inference, loka prasiddha anumana, and other could be called lokatita anumana. I have already referred to Kamalashila's reference to Purandara's statement that Charvakas do admit commonsensical inferences, loka prasiddha anumana, but the inference which is made by transcending the worldly way, that is transcending laukika marga, is denied by them. This indirectly refers to a Charvaka thinker called Purandara, who upheld such a common sense oriented epistemological perspective. The original term which I have translated as commonsensical inference is loka prasiddha anumana. Now, what exactly does Purandara mean by the term loka prasiddha anumana? While asserting loka prasiddha anumana, Purandara is also rejecting certain kinds of inferences which are contrary to it, namely the inferences which transgress the worldly way. Accordingly, I am suggesting loka prasiddha can mean strongly established within the framework of this worldly way of life. Because the word loka prasiddha in itself does not have this whole connotation, so loka prasiddha can also be interpreted as popular, well known among people. But then, if you just understand well known among people as the meaning of loka prasiddha, then for example, people accept God, and that there is God is accepted by majority of people. So, just because something is accepted by majority of people, can we say that that is loka prasiddha? we cannot say, because that is not what Charvakas mean when they use the word Loka Prasiddha, because immediately after that, when Purandara says that Loka Prasiddha Anumana is acceptable to Charvakas, but that which transcends Laukika Marga, that is worldly way of life, this worldly way of life, that is not acceptable, which transcends this worldly way of life is not acceptable. So we have to take both these acceptance and denial together and interpret Loka Prasiddha in terms of that. So I am suggesting that Loka Prasiddha, Prasiddha means strongly established, Siddha means established, Prasiddha means strongly established within the framework of this worldly way of life. Loka here would not only be taken to mean world, but this worldly approach to life or this worldly way of life. Here I am interpreting the term Loka as related to this worldly or secular way of life, and the term Prasiddha as strongly established. In other words, Loka Prasiddha Anumana is an inference which proves something within the framework of this worldly way of life. I think that this is the most plausible meaning of the word. Loka Prasiddha inference was interpreted above is wide enough to include verifiable inferences accepted by the more learned Charvakas. But in addition to verifiable inferences, it also includes a class of non-verifiable inferences under the condition that they are Loka Prasiddha, that is, that they are strongly supported within the framework of this worldly way of life. That is, what I am suggesting is that if here the main consideration is that there is an empirical world, there is social world, so to say, the world in which there are many human beings, many living beings, and this is what we experience. Now, what we have to accept in order to explain our experience of this world satisfactorily, that would be regarded as the inference, Loka Prasiddha type of inference. So it will not only mean verifiable inference, but even if an inference is not verifiable, but it has some kind of explanatory necessity. In order to explain our life in this world, it is necessary to accept X, Y, Z, although that X, Y, Z is not empirically given to us. And then there will be also another category, that there are certain things which are not necessary, which do not have explanatory necessity in order to explain our life in this world, though they may be accepted by the majority. So we have to examine whether anything which is claimed to be there is necessary, either because it is given empirically, or it can be given empirically, or because it has certain kind of explanatory necessity. That is, it is necessary to accept it in order to explain our life in this world. So they are empirically, or in addition to verifiable inferences, it also includes a class of non-verifiable inferences under the condition that they are Loka Prasiddha, that is, that they are strongly supported within the framework of this worldly way of life. They are empirically or pragmatically necessary for explaining the facts of this world. Laukika Marga, which means the worldly way of life, is an important concept in this context. It is comparable with the term worldly practices, Loka Vyavahara, which the skeptic Jayarashi talks about in his work. Jayarashi says that the worldly practices are common to both ignorant and learned people. In other words, nobody can get rid of them. But Jayarashi, being a skeptic, does not accept any principles or essences underlying these worldly practices. Hence he says that all such practices may be appreciated without reflecting upon them. The mitigated empiricist Charvakas we are discussing now, however, consider worldly practices not at superficial level but at a deeper level. Rootedness in worldly practices then becomes the criterion of acceptability of knowledge claims. Common sense beliefs are at the root of the worldly practices. In this sense, these mitigated empiricist Charvakas can be called common sense empiricists, and the best approximation to the concept of Lokaprasiddha Anumana is, I think, commonsensical inference or commonsensically acceptable inference. It should be noted here that common sense beliefs are not commonly accepted beliefs or popular beliefs, but they are beliefs which should be commonly accepted, because non-acceptance of them will lead to pragmatic contradiction. Lokaprasiddha inferences interpreted in this way will include inferences regarding the existence of space, time, other minds, matter, etc., which follow from our daily life by way of explanatory necessity or pragmatic necessity. For example, when I am writing, it follows that material objects like paper, pen exist. When I am communicating with others, it follows that there are other minds. Similarly, when I am writing, it follows that there are space and time. When I am writing, I am moving pen from left to right. Right and left being spatial concepts, it follows that space exists. Since writing is an act which begins at one point of time and ends at another, it follows that there is time. In the modern context, G. E. Moore's defense of common sense incorporates these forms of reasoning. G. E. Moore is also known for his refutation of idealism. I want to suggest that the mitigated empiricist Charvakas who accepted Lokaprasiddha Anuman denied otherworldly metaphysics, where the Indian critics of idealism and defenders of common sense of those times. Now let us try to understand the materialist argument for of the Charvakas in the light of the above notion of Lokaprasiddha Anumana. Let us once again turn to the materialist argument of the Charvakas. Consciousness arises from the four gross elements, like the intoxicating power which arises from molasses. Another version is also found. The consciousness which is seen in the modified insentient elements arises in them, like the red color arises due to combination of betel leaf, betel nut, and spice powder. Both these arguments appear as incomplete arguments, that is anthymemy. Let us grant for the time being that the first three members of the well-known Nyaya syllogism can give the model of complete argument. The mountain has fire because it has smoke, like the kitchen, or whatever has smoke has fire, like the kitchen. We can compare the Charvaka argument with it. The consciousness arises from the four material elements because ... like intoxicating power which arises in molasses, or like red color which arises in the chewed combination of betel leaf, etc. It can be clearly seen that the Charvaka argument is incomplete because it contains the statement of the thesis, that is pratidnya, and instance, that is drishtanta, but no reason, that is hetu. There is no statement of invariable concomitance also. So the important question persists: what is the reason intended by Charvakas? In order to trace the reason, one needs to elaborate the contention of the Charvakas. One thing is sure, that here the Charvakas intend to express the idea of inseparability between body and consciousness. It is not clear as to which ontological category Charvakas would apply to consciousness. Consciousness could be understood as a new quality, guna, emerging in the body, or function, kriya, of the body, or disposition, shakti, of the body. In all these models, body can be called the material cause or the ground, upadana, of the consciousness. So at this stage, the Charvakas are simply arguing that since consciousness is inseparable from corporeal body, it does arise within the limits of the body, it must be arising from the body itself. It must have the corporeal body as its material cause, as its upadana, material basis or ground. So the reason which could be added to the above incomplete argument would be that because consciousness is found in the living body only, and the complete argument would be the consciousness arises from the four material elements which constitute the body. Because consciousness is found in the living body only, if a quality or motion of a power is found in a composite substance and not outside it, then it must be arising from that composite substance itself, like intoxicating power which arises in molasses, or like red color which arises in the chewed combination of betel leaf, etc. The opponents of the Charvakas, who believe in consciousness to be independent of body, will not be or are not satisfied with this argument. One of the main problems they would pose is the heterogeneity between body and consciousness. The opponents believe that in the case of material cause, there is homogeneity between cause and effect. The effect cannot be radically different from its material cause. For example, if the threads are yellow, the cloth is also yellow. If the earthen halves are red, the earthen halves from which the pot is made, if they are red, the earthen pot will also be red, and so on and so forth. Here the opponents are distinguishing between efficient cause and material cause, nimitta karana and upadana karana. An efficient cause is externally related to its effect and can be heterogeneous to it. For example, a weaver is an efficient cause of the cloth. He or she is externally related to it and can be heterogeneous with it. For example, a weaver is sentient, whereas the cloth produced is insentient. But threads are the material cause of the cloth. They are internally related to it and have to be homogeneous with it. So, the opponents think that if consciousness has a material cause, it must be homogeneous with it. The corporeal body being heterogeneous with consciousness cannot be the ground of consciousness, because body is material but consciousness is immaterial. So, they imagine a non-corporeal substance which they call Atman, Purusha, Jiva, etc. as the cause or abode of consciousness. Buddhists do not believe in the substance called Atman. So, although Buddhists are not accepting Atman like these other schools are accepting, and they are talking about this idea of Upadana Karana and Karya. There is a quality or motion or power. Consciousness is like a quality or motion or power, and Atman is Upadana Karana, that is the material cause of that. Now, this idea of some substance being material cause of consciousness is not acceptable to Buddhists. But in Buddhist tradition, there is another way of explaining different, instead of efficient cause and there is nimitta karana and upadana karana, efficient cause and material cause, we have different type of classification of pratyayas where hetu and so on and so forth. I need not go into that, but there is an idea of samanantara pratyaya, immediately preceding cause, and instead of accepting a substance called Atman, what they accept is series of consciousnesses. So, for them, when any consciousness arises, before that the series already must be present. That is, the consciousness does not arise without any conscious background, so to say. So, the series of consciousnesses becomes the background on which a new consciousness can arise. And that, in that sense, we can say that what is called samanantara pratyaya, that is immediately preceding cause, is a kind of internal cause. Sometimes they also use the word upadana for that. So, samanantara pratyaya is something like upadana karana, which is the ground of consciousness, and other causal factors will be external to that consciousness. For example, the object or the sense organ. In the case of perception, you can say that the external object which causes the cognition, sense organ causes the cognition, they are external to the cognition itself, but there is at the same time a series of cognitions on the background of which a new consciousness or new cognition arises. So, that is how Buddhists would replace Atman by the prior consciousness, the series of consciousnesses, and that will be something like upadana karana for them. So, Buddhists do not believe in the substance called Atman, but they accept a continuum, santana,
of consciousnesses or consciousness and regard immediately preceding consciousness as the immediate cause samanantara pratyaya of the occurrence of consciousness at any given moment. Hence, it becomes the task of Charvakas to present their argument in such a strong way that it will answer this objection. That is the problem of homogeneity between cause and effect, material cause and effect. So, Charvakas, Buddhists are also saying that there is a homogeneity because there is a series of consciousnesses on the background of which new consciousness arises. And others are saying that there is a special substance other than body which has consciousness as its characteristic. So, body itself cannot be the basis or the ground of consciousness according to all these systems. Hence, it becomes a task for Charvakas to present their argument in such a strong way that it will answer the objection. Charvakas try to fulfill this task by using the above metaphors. So, the metaphors are mainly meant for proving, this point that heterogeneous causation is possible. The metaphors are modeled to show how material cause can produce an effect which is entirely new, different, and hence heterogeneous with it. Molasses, that is the raw material used for producing liquor, does not have the intoxicating power, but this quality arises through the process of fermentation. Similarly, the betel leaf and other ingredients of pan do not initially have red color, but the red color arises anew through the process of mixing and chewing them. Similarly, consciousness, which was not there before in the material elements, earth, water, fire, and air, can arise in them if the elements combine in a particular way, in a peculiar way, so as to form an organic body. Here, the notions of processing, mixing, and chewing, and peculiar combination, etc., are significant, though Charvakas have only suggested but not always used them explicitly. They may remind us of the distinction we are taught in school chemistry between chemical compounds and mixtures. If a mixture of ingredients, in a mixture of ingredients which are mixed, do not lose their own properties but only add to each other's properties. But a chemical compound can have an entirely new property different from the properties of its components. For example, lime juice mixed with sugar and salt has a taste sweet, sour, and salty. It does not have an entirely different taste, heterogeneous with the original taste, because it is just a mixture and not a chemical compound. But water is a chemical compound of hydrogen and oxygen and has an entirely different property useful for extinguishing fire than the properties of its components, hydrogen, which is inflammable, and oxygen, which helps burning. Similarly, Charvakas are suggesting corporeal body is not just four elements put together, but their biochemical compound which assumes an entirely different property, namely sentience, which was not there in the material elements. Hence, Charvakas through their argument are trying to convey two things. Consciousness must be arising from body and not from a cause external to body, because it is inseparable from body. And two, consciousness can arise from body although it is heterogeneous with the latter, because an entirely new property can arise in a chemical compound, like it happens in the case of intoxicating power of liquor and red color in pan. The inference for Charvaka materialism as formulated above falls under the category of non-verifiable inference. It will be Utpadya Pratiti Anumana. It is based on a very general type of generalization about heterogeneous material causation in general, and not about the law of origination of consciousness from material, just as in the case of inference for the existence of God, we have only, as the evidence, we have only makers of ordinary objects, and what we are trying to infer is God. Similarly, here also, as evidence, what we have is intoxicating power, red color, etc., which arises in different combinations of material objects, but we don't have consciousness itself arising from matter as the evidence. So, this is also in a way a non-verifiable inference. Hence, it is a kind of analogical inference, because intoxicating power which is generated in molasses is just a metaphor or analogy for consciousness and not an instance of it. Now the question is, would such a non-verifiable analogical inference be acceptable in Charvaka epistemological framework, and if so, under what conditions would it be acceptable? Here I want to suggest that although the above argument is a case of non-verifiable inference, it can still be acceptable to mitigated empiricist Charvakas on the ground that it is loka prasiddha, that is, it is acceptable within the framework of a worldly way of life. The relation between reason property and target property in this inference is not based on logical necessity or empirical necessity, but what can be called explanatory necessity. One is claiming here that just as the power of intoxication in processed molasses cannot be explained without accepting their origin in the fermented molasses themselves, similarly consciousness which is found in body and not found outside it cannot be explained satisfactorily without accepting its origin in the material body itself. Just as the intoxicating power in the molasses cannot be explained satisfactorily, repetition. No, just as the intoxicating power in the molasses cannot be explained satisfactorily as a transcendent entity having an isolated existence or as having a mysterious source, similarly consciousness in the body cannot be explained satisfactorily as a transcendent entity having an isolated existence or as having a mysterious source such as Atman. Hence, the inference of the transmigrating soul as the substratum of consciousness lacks explanatory necessity, and therefore it is not acceptable. But inference of matter as the cause of consciousness or the living body itself as the locus of consciousness is acceptable because it has explanatory necessity. So, I have tried to take some steps towards reinterpretation and reconstruction of the mitigated empiricist Charvaka epistemology. I have tried to argue that it can be stated in a stronger form which can counter the idealist and otherworldly claims of the religious philosophies and also give a fuller explanation of the secular life. Religious systems of philosophy attributed extreme empiricism to Charvakas as their official philosophy and then attacked it as a soft target. They argued that if Charvakas do not accept inference as pramana, then they would commit pragmatic contradiction. Because when Charvaka says that inference is not a pramana, he presupposes that the other person understands what he says. Understanding what the other person says is a kind of inferential knowledge. Hence, while saying that inference is not pramana, Charvakas are presupposing that inferential knowledge is a fact. This is a pragmatic contradiction. So, on the one hand, they are trying to say that inference is not pramana at all, but they have, while saying this itself, they have accepted that inference is a means to knowledge, and therefore it is a pragmatic contradiction. And this charge we find in Dharmakirti, for example. Dharmakirti, I mean the term pragmatic contradiction, for that the term which is used in Indian logic is Svavachana Virodha. That is, sometime, I mean this is a fallacy of thesis. When you present an inference, you first present the thesis. If the thesis itself involves a pragmatic contradiction, or if it is contradicted by perception or contradicted by also sometimes they talk of what is publicly accepted, but we will not go into that. But what is if the thesis itself is contradicted by perception, or if the thesis itself involves pragmatic contradiction, then the whole inference becomes fallacious because the thesis is fallacious. So, it is a fallacy of thesis, namely pakshabhasa. And what is Svavachana Virodha? Svavachana Virodha means, suppose I say that I cannot utter a single sentence in English, then this itself, while saying this, I am saying this by uttering a single sentence in English, but what I am saying is that I cannot utter. So this contradiction is different from logical contradiction. In logical contradiction, we have to say something and also say the negation of it, express both P and not P. Whereas here I am not expressing P as well as not P, I am just saying not P, but my act of uttering P itself presupposes P. So this is how there is a contradiction between the content of the sentence and the act of uttering the sentence. So if the thesis of an inference contains this kind of contradiction, then the thesis is fallacious. And Dharmakirti in Nyayabindu gives, when he discusses the fallacies of thesis, he gives this as an example, that anumanam apramanam. That is, when Charvaka says that anumana is not pramana, he is committing a pragmatic contradiction, because when in communicative situation you presuppose that what you say the other person will understand. Now when you think that the other person understands what I am saying, that means that on the basis of utterance you are able to understand the meaning. Understanding the meaning on the basis of utterance is a kind of inferential knowledge, and therefore you already accept the possibility of inferential knowledge, but you are saying that inferential knowledge is not possible. So this is it is a pragmatic contradiction according to Dharmakirti. From Charvaka side, two responses are possible. One response would be extreme empiricist and the other would be mitigated empiricist. Extreme empiricist response would be this: when Charvakas deny inferential knowledge, what they deny is its certainty. They do not deny possibility or probability, and when they presuppose that the other person can understand what he says, they are accepting inferential knowledge at probabilistic level. So probably what I am saying the other person will understand, or probably when the other person says something, this is what he means. But this will only be probably this is what he means. It is not certainly this is what he means. So in that sense I can say that inference is not pramana, and even then I can use inference as a useful means to knowledge. This will be the answer from extreme empiricist point of view. From mitigated empiricist point of view, the response would be of a different type. Opponents were saying that denial of inferences as means to knowledge is inconsistent with the common worldly practices such as linguistic communication. Now, mitigated empiricist Charvakas are saying that okay, in that case, let us accept those inferences as means to knowledge which are consistent with the common worldly practices. Hence, they render consistency with this worldly practices itself as the criterion of the acceptability of an inference, and deny those inferences which transgress the limits of these worldly practices. Hence, what the opponents claim to be the weakness of Charvaka epistemology, namely inconsistency with common worldly practices, the mitigated empiricist Charvakas turned into its strength by making rootedness in the common worldly practices as the criterion of acceptability of the knowledge claims. So, since this is the last lecture, I would like to express my thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, who permitted and encouraged the activity by giving facilities, different persons at departments of the university, the registrar, the organizing committee, research department, state department, multimedia and computer section, other agencies, caterer, traveling agent, Tanushri Bishwas for her initiative and organization, Professor Iris Clemens for her encouragement and support, all the participants for their interest and cooperation, and Kiran Chivte, who made the participation of parents possible. Danke sehr.